Awesome. Well, Bryan, great. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Um, I'm excited. We've had a lot of conversations before this, and every time we talk, there's like so much that I feel like I wish we could talk more about. So I'm excited to dive into it. But I think what would be a good way to start is just to give a little bit of your background and a little bit about what you're up to at Playbook.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So background about me. So I've been doing digital marketing for, 15 years now. I started out my career in direct response marketing and lead gen, a company called Quinn Street, which you may or may not have heard of.
Hmm.
Went to Marin Software for a little while, where I advised some of their biggest companies on their search strategies. And I spent 4 years at Facebook, 2 years working with a bunch of their big financial services firms like Wells Fargo and Quicken Loans and PNC Bank. And then I moved over to what's now the disruptors vertical, where I helped a lot of venture-backed startups scale up their advertising on the Facebook platform. And what I found really interesting in working on the disruptors team was I was in charge of reaching out to some of the venture capitalists and then working with their portfolio companies. So I was in contact with Andreessen and Social Capital and some of those kinds of guys. And I would reach out to the portfolio companies and they'd be like, oh man, I've been trying to get a hold of somebody at Facebook. And I'm like, you can't get a hold of anyone here, right? And then, yeah, no, we have zero support. They might have had a call center rep somewhere who was like outsourced through Accenture, right? And the people that were supporting them really didn't know how to support them properly and teach them how to actually do customer acquisition. And so they were very happy to hear from me. And then what I also found was a lot of them had worked with agencies in the past, and then the agencies sort of had a one size fits all model, right? They would say like, here's you set up your lookalike audiences and you set up your OCPM bids, which is what they called it back then. And you may or may not have a couple of videos, and then if it doesn't work, they just look at them and go, well, you need to fix your website, or maybe you need to change the your product, and they just sort of leave it at that. And so
Yeah.
these companies, they have a lot of money to spend. They didn't know how to actually make it work, make it profitable for them. And so we could get in there and start kind of building all the foundational elements to get them to scale up. And they were really appreciative of it. And then Facebook, being Facebook, got political circa 2016, right around the first election. The politics set in, and then they decided that they needed higher revenue per head in our org. So they moved us to companies who had a lot more funding, who were already spending millions of dollars on the platform. But I knew that there was this area, these companies that really wanted to scale, and they didn't know how. And now we were, cutting the lugs out from under them once again. And so I decided to start Playbook Media to focus in on those companies and help them to scale up customer acquisition. So I left in 2017 to do that. I've been building up my company for the last 5 years now.
So, well, that's awesome. So when you said disruptors, so it's 2013 you started, then sort of 2015, I take it, you went to the disruptors group at Facebook. And what did disruptors mean to Facebook at that time? Like, sort of what was an example annual spend for a disruptor?
Yeah, so I would say, it's interesting because we were working with companies who were sometimes really early at that time. They were spending
Yeah.
maybe $5,000, $10,000 a month, but we knew they had the capital and the want to scale up, and that's what we were focusing on, was how do you actually tip these companies. And so at that time, there were lots of great companies that came through the disruptors team. I mean, I remember Jet came through us back then, Peloton, Mac Weldon, if you're familiar with them,
Yeah.
House. There were a bunch of really good companies that we helped to kind of scale up. But there were a lot that, were smaller that weren't quite ready too. And so we were more okay with working with those companies and telling them, oh, well, maybe this isn't the right fit for you right now. And then now, if you talk to the disruptors group, they're only working with the Robin Hoods and the the Chimes and all the, Peloton maybe still, the, bigger businesses of the world that are already spending millions in customer acquisition.
And I want to dive into Playbook, but I know everybody's always really fascinated with Facebook and Meta. And a question that everybody has, which I think is still a problem, is like, how much do I have to spend before I can get somebody on the phone? So like,
Yeah, no,
or I get somebody assigned to me.
it's
Like,
a
what do
good
you think the
question.
answer is now?
I think that the waters have gotten even more muddied than they were when I
Yeah,
was there. And even then, we would sometimes find businesses that were call center reps and they were spending, $1 million a month and they just
yeah,
had no support. And, it's a little bit, whenever you look at the Facebook org, it's built out by vertical, right? And then they're also looking at the size of the company and then how invested they are in Facebook as a partner, right? And so if they go in and, of course they're going to try with all the big companies out there, the Procter and Gambles and, all those kinds of big advertisers, and they're going to have big teams assigned to them, but there are also really big brands that may not have anyone assigned to them. And that's because the brand hasn't really leaned into the platform, right? So they're going to look and say, okay, who do we think has the potential and who needs our help? If someone's naturally spending a lot and they don't seem to need any help, then they may not provide support. But if somebody is starting to scale up and is very vocal with their rep, like we need more support, we need more support, then you're more likely to get that rep. So it's probably not it's not a science, right? I can't give a straight answer, unfortunately. But what I can say is that agencies like ours actually have really good support. And
yeah,
so there's some folks that come to us and they need a rep, and especially in areas that get more like flag from ad policy and things like that, like CBD, for example, we can help CBD
yeah.
companies, and they may never get a rep. So finding the right partner is a way to go if you need that support.
Yeah, I think that's a huge advantage of an agency is that you have a relationship with not only just a person at Facebook, but multiple people. You have a much better sense of the product roadmap. You're getting a lot more inside intel, just from those relationships about what works and what's coming. And I think people, if you're kind of your average performance advertiser, maybe it's not that important. But if you're really trying to push the envelope inside of Facebook, like you absolutely need that stuff so an agency has a huge value there.
We like to think it helps, Not to say that in-house
I
teams
know.
can't get there. I think the big ones do,
Yeah.
right? They get the level of
Yeah.
support they're looking for.
Yeah.
But it's those in between guys, where
Yeah.
it could be problematic.
Yeah. So Playbook obviously does Facebook or Meta, or what are we calling it now? Is it
Yeah,
Do you guys
you
call it
can
Meta?
call it Meta, you can call it Facebook.
Okay.
You're probably hearing me
Um,
call it Facebook just because that's what I'm used to. And then we still advertise on Facebook and Instagram, but
yeah.
it's Meta. Well, we can call it Meta.
I'm showing my old schoolness. All right. So you do Meta. What else do you do? What other channels do you guys have?
So we do Google. TikTok is obviously a growing one. And then we're really excited about connected TV right now. That's an area that we think is starting to explode and is only going to get even more so as a big channel for advertisers. And I think the big reason there is one, the TV has always been an amazing advertising platform, right? You get that lean back experience. It's kind of a forced view of 30 seconds. And you can do a lot more storytelling there. And traditionally that hadn't really been available to most advertisers, right? You have to go through a bunch of gatekeepers to buy on TV. It seems complicated. How do you get remnant inventory? You get the lower CPM. You pay millions of dollars for the upfronts, all that kind of stuff. But now you can literally plug in and you get a couple $1,000s and you can start going, right? And then you can layer in all the data audiences that we get on digital. And so your targeting is way better than TV has ever been before. And then to add a third layer in, they have better identity graphs, so you can start to understand true measurement from TV. Whereas before it was like, well, we ran in this DMA and we saw an increase in traffic, and so that must mean that we got an ROI, right? But you can get a true closed loop now, which I think is
Yeah.
it's just going to be amazing to see what happens in that platform.
That's cool. So, and then you guys are doing like campaign setup, campaign management. Are you doing creative as well?
Yeah, we do have a creative arm. So we have an in-house videographer and editors, and then
Wow.
graphic design as well. And so we usually do smaller projects in-house, but then we have a whole bunch of studio partners throughout the LA area that we partner with, and we can basically scale up to any kind of creative there. But it gets expensive to have those people obviously full time unless you have so many projects going through that makes sense for you to have a studio. So
Yeah.
scaled up projects, we lean on our partnerships, but we do a lot of DR type creative ourselves, and we also go out and source influencers and UGC content through our partnership with Grin.
Yeah. And you guys have I think a really interesting pricing model that's kind of different in the space. Can like tell me about that?
Yeah, pricing on agencies has always been a tough thing, right? Because you get that agent client dilemma, and so we had led with percentage of spend for a long time, and I think in a lot of ways that pricing model makes sense for agencies because like, hey, when you win, we win, and you're only going to spend more when there's performance. But then the downside makes it hard, right? When things get tough, now the agency's got to cut their own revenue, and that does become a bit of a conflict of interest. So what we've actually moved towards is actually a flat rate where we come in and we work with our partners to help them think through really their end-to-end strategy in their marketing funnel, right? And so we'll go in and we use what we call a bottoms-up model where we look at, okay, what are all the foundational elements of in their marketing? So what's their conversion rate look like? How's their brand messaging set up? What is their email nurture? And then, what are the different channels they're running? And where do we see optimization opportunities? And then we implement what we call playbooks, right? Where we go in and we actually help to tackle those optimization opportunities. And we do that actually just on an hourly basis. And the nice thing is we have our subsidiary GrowTal, which is a marketplace for marketing experts. And so we're able to build teams of marketing experts to execute on these different playbooks. And then whenever a client feels comfortable that that kind of level of consulting is done and they can do it internally, we can easily ramp back down again. And that way it saves the client costs by not having them continue paying for something that is maybe more of a project work. Or we can just ramp down to a smaller retainer fee, once you get those upfront
Yeah.
pieces done.
I love it because it's really thoughtful and handles all the problems of, like you said, the traditional client agency relationship. Like, the percent of spend model is great, but then if the client ever wants to drop spend, like you said, the agency is like, well, I don't want to lose money, or not, now I'm going to make less money. How do I staff that differently? Whereas like you've aligned interests and you've allowed flexibility up and down, and within capabilities of the client, because as people hire or lose people they need or don't need. So that's really clever. I think it's a great model. It's a great fit.
Yeah, it's taken us a few years to figure it out.
Right.
And I think, one of the big areas in that too, when you're on percentage of spend, let's say you're scaled up and performance starts to drop, all of a sudden, I need to keep my spend high. How do I fix Facebook, right? How do I fix Meta? iOS 14 came in and now I need to continue spending. Well, actually, maybe what you need to do in that case is spend a lot more time looking at analytics, looking at site conversion, looking at your email pass, and even in this current state, right? Like everybody needs to get more profitable. You need to go focus on those fundamentals, right? And if I'm incentivized to continue spending in a channel, I want to allocate resources to that channel, where it'd actually be better for me to be allocating my agency resources in other areas that are going to have those downstream effects, right? And that's kind of moving back down that bottoms up model into this foundational areas that are going to, impact the channels further downstream.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about GrowTal, because I think this is really clever too, how you've combined an agency with, sort of a talent marketplace.
Yeah, sure. So whenever we started out, right, when we were just doing Meta, we knew we wanted to expand into additional channels and that clients needed our help there. And also that clients sometimes wanted to just hire a consultant, right? They just want to hire someone, freelance expert. And so looking at those two kinds of problems within our own P&L, hiring a full-time person, all of a sudden now you're on their payroll and then you have to try to go sell it, right? But if you sell it ahead of hiring, then all of a sudden, you can get into a place where you've oversold. And so
Right.
we decided, hey, we should build out a freelance marketplace, and then that way we can bring in these amazing experts into a marketplace and have them on a bench, right? And if somebody comes to us, they're too small to pay our minimums, or they don't want a full agency relationship, hey, we can go place that person directly. Or when we have a client and we know that they need help with search or some other area that maybe we hadn't hired for yet at that point, we could go bring in a freelance expert in to execute on that. And so we decided to do that. When we launched in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, we realized, hey, there's going to be a lot of talent in the market, right? So we might as well start
Right.
getting those people on board. So we accelerated a launch and launched in July of 2020 and have been building up that business. And as time has gone on, we've realized having that flexibility in our workforce has really been key, right? Because everybody, even in the Great Resignation, right, we weren't immune to it. A couple people left, right? So when we lose a good media buyer, you need to replace them quickly, and it was really easy. We just had pull
Yeah.
someone right in, right? And so that has been really key for us, and I think key for our clients too, because we can bring someone in a week or two versus them spending 2 months hiring someone.
Right. When you first told me about it, I was like, this sounds crazy because you're going to lose your best talent to your clients. And you're like, no, 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 it doesn't work that way. Like, there's a lot of these consultants just like being consultants, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought back to like my Nannigan's experience, and like when we used to run media, and kind of, and I was like, oh wow, he's really right. Like, there's people that love running campaigns, and that's all they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you can totally see it. Like, I don't want to go work for a company. Like, I just want to run campaigns.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with the headaches of like,
I think it gives
you
them
know,
more job security too, honestly,
yeah,
being an independent. I mean, there's so many startups that, push heavy into user acquisition and they
yeah,
raise a bunch of money and then eventually things start getting wonky and then what, right? And if you're in a singular kind of company, you're reliant purely on that company's success. Whereas if you're an independent, everybody needs growth marketing. And fact
right,
is, if you're good, you can probably run 3 to 5 clients at any given time, especially if you're
yeah.
focused on a singular channel.
Right, and I think that's another thing is like these really good campaign managers, like they get bored, So if they're just like hammering away on a single brand, they're just like,
Yep. Yeah.
what else you got, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. And I think it's more lucrative for them in the long run too, because people are
yeah.
willing to pay a good rate for someone fractionally more than they'd be willing to pay them at a full time from an hourly perspective.
All right, I'm gonna switch gears a little.
Yeah.
There's a lot of uh, there's a lot of great content on Twitter. A lot of smart people talking on Twitter. A lot of it in D2C is focused around ad spend, customer acquisition, people sharing ideas. And there's like I feel like there's so many different ways that people are thinking about campaign performance, right? So you often hear ROAS. At Bainbridge, we would argue that like, well, it's maybe not the best metric, right? There's other things that we would say are more important, like your profitability over time, contribution profit over time, lifetime value,
Yep.
right? But how do you handle that? Like, everybody has like their sort of favorite metrics, and so how do you handle, which metrics are the right ones for the customer? And how do you get somebody, if they have the wrong metrics, kind of onto the right track for what really drives their business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. And I mean, it might sound like a cop out, but it does depend on the business. And one of the big reasons is it depends on their financial situation. I think the ideal is what you're saying, profitability over time. What's your customer lifetime value? What's your CAC? And then what's your payback period, right? And how much can you stomach from a marketing budget until you make that back, right? And so it's about cash flow cycles. And so some folks that have they need a short cash flow cycle, ROAS may be something that they need to focus on right then, right? So they're bootstrapped, they need that money to come back in 30 days so they can buy more inventory or whatever they need, right? They may need to focus on that short-term profitability. But a bigger business that has a bunch of cash in the bank, and they may be able to purely focus on customer lifetime value and be okay with a longer payback window. So I think it really depends on the company. And so we run it based on what our clients' needs are. So some need that short-term profitability. Others are okay with something a little bit longer. And then I think, one of the areas that we try to help where we can is to help secure additional funds. So we have, a partnership with Clearco, for example, who can bring in some good financing terms for DTC companies, and that can help. Anything that we can do to try to improve that, I think is good.
Right.
But yeah, it just really depends on what their economics are.
Yeah. And the problem always with lifetime value, well, everybody calculates it, and is it revenue? Is it
Mm-hmm.
net revenue? Is it gross profit? What? And we would argue it's contribution profit, like that's the acid test. But the other problem is that people will fudge a little around the time part of that.
Yep.
And because they know that if they can push the time window out further, then more revenue, or whatever it is, accumulates, and then in order to justify the higher tax, and we saw that back in the Nanigans days all the time, and people were like, "Oh, my lifetime is now like 36 months."
Yeah.
Like, is it really a long time?
Well, and the other thing is that if you think about from a cohort perspective on a subscription model or some of these other areas, companies who are early in getting into, paid acquisition, they might assume that their organic customers are going to look the same as their paid customers. And usually those cohorts actually degrade a bit as you scale up. And
Sure.
there's some misconceptions there where people think, oh, my CAC's going to come down as I scale. Generally not the case, right? And that my customer lifetime value is going to stay the same, if not improve, as I improve, my customer retention and the other efforts I'm doing. And yes, ideally, but oftentimes not true. And so if you make these assumptions that you're going to get the contributions down the line, you can end up in real trouble. So I tend to lean on the more conservative side of metrics.
Yeah, that's smart. Well, everybody has this problem, right? Like, hey, we're killing it on the channel, and then they're like, oh, if I kill it at this level, if I just spend 10x more, I'll just keep, and the performance degrades. So like, what drives that? Like, I know there's like 101 answers, but like, it's just been sort of an iron law of performance advertising that happens. So what is behind that?
Yeah, well, let's say if you're going to take Meta for as an example, right? Meta's, I've always said this, they're very good at finding early adopters, right? So the Pixel will pick up on the signal of the initial people purchasing, and then they start delivering to people like that. In the early days, it was the lookalikes found the 1% of people, and the 1% lookalike would work really well, right? But once you get past that level of early adopters, you get past what I kind of call them their impulse purchasers, right? Mm-hmm. So impulse purchasers, they're interested in the new shiny thing, they want to try it out, and so you get these folks coming in. But then you try to scale to the early majority, and if you think about, Simon Sinek's, have you ever watched Crossing the Chasm? He has a great YouTube on it.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But, crossing that chasm, right, getting to the early majority, all of a sudden you get into the next group of people who are a bit skeptical. They're a little bit more price conscious. There are those they have those tendencies, and so they're just less likely to purchase on a first impression. And so you need to hit them with multiple impressions. You need to
Right.
convince them, handle all the objection handling, and then continue moving up the curve. And so if brands aren't investing in how do I differentiate my messaging to reach new consumers, how do I improve my conversion rate optimization, how do I diversify my product to reach new consumers, all those kinds of things that are fundamentals further down funnel, the upper funnel metrics are going to start to degrade, right? And so your Facebook advertising or your Google advertising, as you expand keywords, right, they're all going to kind of follow that same curve. And so you have to do that harder work of kind of
Yeah.
reaching new customer segments.
Well, I use the example of like the mattress in a box, companies. Like when it came out, there were people that were like, this is exactly what I've been hoping for. Is like a mattress in a box. It just gets delivered, and mattress shopping sucks. Like, you got this like phenomenal response rate, right? And like the explosion of the Caspers and the Purples. But then I think those signals went out, and like all of a sudden there's like 900 of these guys, and you're like, wait, now there's like, you're trying to reach like, people that are like, why would I buy a mattress in a box? Like,
Yep.
and like you said, you're trying to convert them, and it gets more and more expensive. And I think you just see, I guess part of my theory is also that like some concepts or brands, or offerings just have, there's a limited number of consumers who are going to convert, and you can spend, as we've seen now in D2C, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars trying to convert those harder to convert people with very little success. So I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know. Maybe it's just an observation.
Well, I think, some of it was, those early days when I was in the disruptors team, right? We'd work with a company like Bonobos, for example, right? And at Bonobos, I don't know how much the money they raised, but they raised a lot of money. And it was, we're going to be the menswear brand for the modern guy. And you can come into our place and you can try everything on, and then we'll have it delivered to your house. And we don't have to pay for retail storefronts.
Yeah,
Right?
that was awesome.
And
Yeah.
I mean, like to folks like me, sitting in Silicon Valley, young professional, open to new ideas, right? To me, it seems amazing. And I think it's like the problem of kind of the echo chamber of Silicon Valley and the folks that, right? It sounds great to us, but to the person who's used to going to Nordstrom all the time and lives and dies by Nordstrom, they may not be as interested, right? And so the
Right.
business is, I think, really good at getting to the segment it's after, but then getting beyond that segment is actually a lot harder than people thought it was going to be. And so they
Yeah.
said, this is going to take over menswear, when in fact it was actually just really good for that early adopter kind of techie personality, right? And so
Right.
Walmart was able to buy it, when they realized that wasn't going to happen. Walmart got it, I think, for a pretty good price. I don't remember what the number was. And
Yeah.
Bonobos is still there now, and that means that Walmart, they're very conscious on the margins. They found a way to run that company and to make it profitable, but it has not become a household name, right? It is not a
Right.
multi-billion-dollar business at this point. And so it's probably got to where it's supposed to be. And I think there are a lot of D2C brands that are like that, and they just had eyes were bigger than what reality was going to be.
Well, and I think that not getting to a multi-billion-dollar brand is okay if you can get there and be profitable, get to where you're supposed to be. I like how you phrase that, and be profitable. Then you've done something really incredible. And people use these numbers as if it's like almost dismissive, but like a $20 million a year brand is a huge accomplishment if you're profitable.
Hell yeah.
There's nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, there's a business that I think has done it really right. They were one of our early clients, is Cuts Clothing, if you know them. I mean, this guy, Stephen Borelli, he's LA hustler. I think he's probably in his late 20s now. And when I met him, he was the only one full time. He had two other guys that were moonlighting. They were working out of a WeWork. he had, found fabric in downtown LA and was making these really nicely cut shirts. And their whole thing was they have a crew neck, the 3 buttons was that,
Yeah.
anyway,
I should
and
know.
a V-neck, and then a couple of different things on the bottom. And so you could sort of buy, these different ways these shirts were cut. And they just
Yeah.
leaned into their audience like crazy. It's kind of a modern, younger guy who cares about his style but wants to be toned down. Then they started sending all their stuff to NBA players, and they've gotten tons of NBA players to wear it. They've built up their
Right.
community on Instagram. They built up their customer acquisition. We helped them early on with that. And they've now built this amazing brand, fully bootstrapped. And I'm sure they're a 30 to $50 million brand by now. And they
Right.
did it over
And
5 years and never had a full venture
profitable.
money. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just the right
Good for
way.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna ask a tough question. Attribution. Everybody loves talking about attribution.
My favorite.
So like, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Why is it so hard? Right. Why? It's always been, I would argue, impossible. But has it been hard, and why has it gotten harder?
Yeah, well, I mean, so attribution, it is one of my favorite subjects because I like talking about it. But it's hard because the data is so disparate, right? You have Google data, you have your site data, you have metadata, you have all these different places, and they're all sending traffic to your website, and there are only so many purchases to go around, right? And so you end up hitting a customer with multiple touch points in different areas where that data is. And then you see these different purchases that are happening. And then it used to be all on a last click basis, right? So it's all click through a URL, you have UTM tracking that goes in there. And last click says, oh, it was Google. But when Google tells you that you should buy every single time somebody searches on your brand, chances are that a lot of those brand conversions started somewhere else, right? If you see an ad on Meta and then you go, oh, well, I'm really interested in a cut shirt, and you search for it on Google, well, who should get credit there, right? And so it's difficult because Google and Meta won't play nice together. And then now you throw in Apple with their iOS 14 updates, and the pixel now is degrading on Facebook's attribution, which I think was pretty good pre iOS 14. And then you have mobile devices and cross-device behavior. It just gets really difficult. There's so much data out there. How do you make really good sense of it? And, I think people want to know, right? Because you want to know where to put your next dollar. And that's an obvious thing, right? Should I take $1 from Facebook and put it to Google, or $1 from Google and put it to Facebook? And so, consumers need to figure this out. And so the way that we think about it is there's a number of simple things you can do. The first thing is get all your data into one place, right? And so we take the data from all the different APIs, from Shopify, from Google Analytics, and everywhere, and we put it all into one spreadsheet. And so now you can see what is the performance of each channel side by side? What does it look like on a last click basis? What does it look like within the platforms? And then you can make some very basic sort of testing, right? What happens if I scale one thing up? Does my revenue change? Does it change by how much? What did it say on one platform versus another, right? And so you can do some very basic kind of testing in that way to see what's incremental and what isn't. And then next step from there was starting to think through lift testing, and we'll do lift testing on the different channels, right? And so what happens when we run a lift test with Facebook's conversion API, lift testing is getting pretty strong again. And you can see at least within Meta, is it working and how much is it driving, right? And you can do the same on YouTube and some other areas. And then getting one more step complex, then you start thinking about media mix modeling. And okay, whenever you look at it from a statistical standpoint, where's the correlation between spend and actual conversions? And then you can model out how that should work and where the multipliers are on each one of those channels. And then you can test that by ramping them up and down and see how accurate your media mix model is. And then the next step is starting to layer AI into those media mix models. For a while there was the whole like data driven attribution models. They basically aren't, you can't do it anymore because of all of the problems with iOS 14 and privacy. But data driven media mix models, I think, is the future. But you have to have a level of scale before you can get there, because now you can start to get real time when you have a lot of scale and your data is structured properly, and you can see what
Yeah.
is the impact of each channel.
Yeah.
Long-winded response, but hopefully it made sense.
No, it's a great one, and I mean, we saw that. The bigger the advertiser, the more when they got up into these budgets of hundreds of millions or billions a year. I'm talking like the bookings and Ubers of the world,
Right.
right? They were just spending dozens of data scientists and lots of very expensive software and very expensive data scientists. I mean, they're really no lack of money for that to try to get to those answers. And I always like kind of felt like either you sort of do what you were talking about, like, oh well, let's just kind of get to a certain level of analysis and call it a day, right? And then, or you make the choice to go all the way down the rabbit hole and I don't, you never get to an answer, right? There's just like sort of kind of, I guess, more questions that you raise and you sort of get, I guess, better degrees of certainty.
Yeah.
But if you're only spending $1 million a year, like it clearly doesn't make sense, or 100,000 a year, to go to that level of detail. But if you're spending $1 billion, like I guess it does.
Yeah, I would say, once you get into spending the multi-millions a year, you want to have a fairly good understanding. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't need it in real time,
Right,
but you do need to understand, like, is something I'm doing incremental or isn't it? Right? And it's really
right,
easy. I mean, if you spend on the wrong audiences on Meta, for example, you can make it look like it's getting a much better return than it is through the pixel. You spend a bunch on customers and you have a really robust email program. Well, and that was one of my first customers. I remember that. They're spending, my first clients, they were spending, I think it was like 20 to 30% of their dollars through Facebook on customers. And their agency had been doing this. And then even their prospect audiences, they weren't excluding, right? And so it made them look like they had this amazing ROAS, but this company had a huge customer base and they had a very good
right,
email program. And so as soon as we went in and we started setting up the proper exclusions and we flipped it to spending more like on an 80-20, 80% to prospecting. And that's actually more like 80-10-10, 10% retargeting and 10% on customers, right? Pixel looked a
right,
lot worse, but guess what? The revenue went up on the other side, right? And
right,
it's so, just thinking through those kinds of things, I think just having a basic understanding of, am I what I'm doing, is it incremental or isn't it? And if I have any thought
right,
that it might not be, let me test and figure out if that's actually a true hypothesis or not.
right, right. Which is also another good argument for working with an agency like you guys, because oftentimes people don't, they're so busy just getting the campaigns going and maintaining the campaigns that like structuring a really good test and being thoughtful about it is very difficult, or they inadvertently pollute it because somebody decides to send a bunch of emails to the holdout or something like that, or retarget the holdout and forgot to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Part of our job is babysitting our clients. No, 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 don't do
Cool.
that.
Yeah. I know another thing that we talked about that I thought was really cool was the bottoms up analysis, or no, is that what you're calling it? Yeah, the
Yeah.
bottoms up analysis.
Yeah, I
Explain that.
alluded to it a little bit earlier, but essentially what it is a lot of companies skip steps whenever they're building up their marketing, right? You get a basic product and then you build out your website and then you say, okay, well, let me go start getting traffic, right? And so either you start buying Google or you start buying Meta. And if you're lucky, you'll get some initial traction there. And so companies will get spending, 30, 50, $100,000 a month, and then they start hitting points of diminishing returns, and they decide, oh well, we need to fix the channel. Something went wrong. ROAS dropped, and what happened was they skipped some fundamentals along the way, right? And oftentimes you can improve the performance of your marketing channels by going back down funnel and looking at the foundational elements. And I kind of look at it as a pyramid, right? So it's from the bottom up.
Yeah.
The very bottom is there a market need for my product, right? Most people have that figured out by the time they're talking to us, right? How am I positioning my product? What's my brand positioning? How am I talking about it? That part sometimes we are helping a lot with. And then how are we bringing that to customers on the website? Are we optimizing our conversion
Right.
rates? And that's a huge piece. Then the next step up from there is as people come to the website, are we capturing their emails first off? And then if we are, how are we nurturing them? And are we actually doing a good job converting people that have raised their hand to talk to us? And then once you get a customer in, how can you improve their lifetime value, right? If you're going to make $10 each customer, good luck scaling a lot, right? Unless you're going to go retail and
Right.
sell that in Target, but definitely not DTC. And so, how do you get up that customer lifetime value to allow you to spend more upper funnel? And then once you get into the upper funnel channels, then you can start talking about individual channel tactics, right? But most
Yeah.
of the times they've skipped some of those earlier steps, and so our team will go in and look at it, and we get hired to handle usually the upper paid channels. Then we'll do an audit and say, okay, what other pieces need to be fixed here? And that's kind of the beauty of that Grow Town model is now we can bring in a team to help with those further down funnel foundation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think now more than ever in this environment, it's so critical. Um, I've used this analogy with you before, so I'll torture it, but like it's the leaky
Yeah.
bucket, right? Like and 6 months ago or whenever in the heydays, if water was the ad spend, it was super cheap. So people didn't really care how leaky their bucket was. There's like pour more water in, right? But now it's like, wait a second, like I've got a lot of good stuff in here. Like I need to keep it. And I just think that being thoughtful, like this is forcing a lot of people to redo that, which is a good thing. People are just going to build much better brands and much better businesses by going through that process and really being thoughtful about it. As opposed to just like, where's the next place I can spend more
Yeah.
money?
Yeah. I mean, nobody wants us to go into a recession, right? But I think it's going to be good for business in a lot of ways, right? It proves out who has a real business, who's really focused on their customers, and who are doing things right. When money is
Yeah,
cheap, that everybody can compete. You just pour money into it, and so the best businesses are consistently fighting with people who are just have cheap money. And so this is gonna,
right.
help bring out the people who are willing to focus on the foundational elements and do the work.
Yeah. So once you go through the bottoms up analysis, um, are you able to like track then the relative impacts of that, or is it more like, hey, we took retention from here to here, or
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the
repeat?
day, like to your point, contribution margin, right? So as you're working through each one of those elements, it should have impact all the way down to your profitability in the bottom line. And so, we look to see which ones we think are going to have the most impact and are also, the most addressable. And it's kind of, weighing those two things. What's the low hanging fruit and what's going to have the most impact? And obviously, you take the easiest ones with the most impact first. And then, looking at those metrics, right? There's the main KPI for that metric. So it might be, what is my customer retention rate, right? Uh, but then you can look at, okay, how does that affect things downstream as well, and how much did it end up impacting my contribution margins?
Switching gears again, you've seen a ton of companies, right? So in your time, and you've had a great career in performance and ad tech. So I love that cut story. Like, do you have other companies that you're like, wow, they did a great job, or companies that you're like, those guys screwed it up so badly. Like, whatever you do, don't do
Yeah.
that.
Oh man, I've got lots of stories. So another story, that early one that we worked with that I think did a really great job was Liquid IV. And what was interesting with that one was it wasn't the biggest success we've ever had. And so, do you know Liquid
Yeah.
IV? I keep
I know the
bringing up
name, but
these
I could.
brands. They're like West Coast brands that people probably know in LA.
It's good for me. I'm an old guy
Yeah,
too,
they're
so it's
like
like
they're
feel
a
like I'm related.
an electrolyte mix that you put in drinks, and they got bought by Unilever,
Got
I think it was. Uh, but early on, they wanted to go direct to consumer, and they built out this great Instagram page, and they had a bunch of followers, and they had this sort of lifestyle of, outdoor life, people doing yoga, sort of the young, healthy kind of crowd, right? And so we started doing the direct to consumer kind of marketing for them, buying on Meta, and what we looked at was we're trying to figure out profitability for them, and what we found was most people were buying one off. They would buy a pack of 12, and then they'd come back and they would buy, it was like a 10 to 20% repeat purchase rate. And that just wasn't going to
Yeah.
work on a consumable that was priced at, $24. With
Yeah.
shipping and everything, like there's just no chance they were ever going to be profitable through Meta. And so we told them, look, if you want to make this work, you have to push people like hell into a subscription, and you got to keep their subscription rate high. And they said, we don't want to force people into subscription. People have subscription fatigue, and that's not our business model. And we said, well, we don't really think this is going to work for you then. Like, you can't spend and do it with this product. And to their credit, they leaned in, right? They said, okay, that's fine. We're going to go retail. And they went 100% at Costco, Walmart, and then they partnered with, and I think this was the really brilliant thing, was they went out and they partnered with artists. They were an LA brand. They had access to, some of the kind of LA celebrities. So they got the chain smokers to put out a special flavor. They got Justin Bieber to put out a limited release, and they did a whole bunch of stuff like that. They went after music venues and artists, and then retail, and they blew up. And they sold to Unilever. I think it was maybe 2 years later, and it was a great exit.
Jeez. Did they come back into D2C ever, or was it really by that point just a
So I
retail
think you can still
kind
buy
of?
from their site. I think they never got rid of the channel, but they just decided that that was
Yeah.
not going to be their customer acquisition channel. And I think what's really interesting to me is I've seen a number of brands kind of move that way, right? They're CPG brands at the end of the day, and there was a thought that CPG was going to be a great D2C play, but it really hasn't turned out that way. I think retail is really important for those brands. And, in some ways it almost goes against my, you know, the religion I was brought up on, which is everything should be digital, and, the traditional channels are
Right.
dying. Well, as it turns out, retail has a huge story to play and in consumables and consumer packaged goods. Another good company like that was Bevel, Walker and Co. If you know them, they were on my book of
Yeah.
business when I was at Facebook. They came up through the Disruptors program, and Tristan Walker over there. We did a pretty good job in terms of buying for them. I think they were doing decently well on direct to consumer. And they were just after Dollar Shave and all that. But he leaned in more heavily into building the brand. Sticking with the black community, really knowing his audience, and then got more and
Yeah.
more distribution. And I think they got bought by one of the big ones too. I don't remember if it was Procter and Gamble, but one of them. But now they're in
Yeah.
all of the Targets and WalMarts and all that, and so you can see that is an interesting play, right? You go digital first, build your community, build some D2C, and maybe you're taking a small loss there. If you got some funding up front, then you're okay doing that, and then go
Mm.
heavy into retail. And I think that's a good play.
Yeah. Well, I also like what you said about that. That I think in the height of the D2C, people kind of forgot they were building brands, or I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating, but got so transactionally focused because it was relatively straightforward to do. And
Yeah.
everybody knew how to do it. And Nanigans probably did his fair share to teach people that way of thinking too.
Yeah.
But you're building these brands, and like people aren't you want to have some affinity to the thing that you're buying, right? Some reason that you're buying it, clothing or drink supplements or razors or whatever it is. And so I just think that's a really interesting. What is happening now is that people are like, I think, getting back to like figuring out like, how do I really build this brand? Can I focus on that? Can I focus on the repeat purchase? Because we would argue that repeat purchase is kind of an indicator of your brand strength, right? Like maybe it's really the indicator.
Yeah.
If you don't have a brand if it doesn't mean anything. If you can't get people to buy it again, or buy it at a higher price or more value to you than a replacement, then you don't really have a brand. You just have sort of like an Amazon thing that every time you buy the buy box you get a sale, but that's it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't want to be the impulse purchase at the register, right? You want to be the sought out one. But at the same time,
Yeah.
I think it's important for brands not to be dogmatic about the distribution channel. Like you can lean,
Yeah.
like consumers want to buy where they want to buy, and you kind of need to be where they are.
Right.
As much as annoying as that might sound for, say, something like Amazon, because they don't share customer data, and it's really hard to understand, different things from there. But people do buy on Amazon, so it's kind of like you need to check that box if you're going to be the type of product that is not going to be sought out directly.
Right. But you only got there probably because you built your brand somewhere else, and then people. I don't know enough about Amazon sellers, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a little skeptical.
Well, I'm just skeptical about how much money they take from all the brands. I wish that it was a little bit
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
I think some of these new marketplaces popping up will be interesting that actually share some of the data back with sellers and give them the ability to build a community.
Yeah. This is great.